The morning sun cast long shadows across Bagram Airfield as Captain Sarah Mitchell performed her pre-flight inspection on the A-10 Thunderbolt II. The aircraft, nicknamed the Warthog by pilots, sat like a menacing predator on the tarmac. Its twin engines hummed quietly while ground crew made final preparations. Sarah ran her hands along the aircraft's titanium armor plating, checking every rivet and panel with the precision that had kept her alive through dozens of combat missions over Afghanistan. At 28 years old, Sarah had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled close air support pilots in the Air Force. Her call sign, Reaper, came not from any bloodthirsty nature, but from her ability to deliver precise strikes that eliminated threats while keeping friendly forces safe. Today's mission would test every skill she had developed over her military career. The briefing room buzzed with tension as intelligence officers laid out the situation. A 12-man Green Beret team had been conducting reconnaissance deep in Taliban territory when their position was compromised. Enemy fighters had surrounded them in a rocky valley near the Pakistan border, and the special operations soldiers were running low on ammunition. Weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly, with thick clouds moving in from the mountains that would soon make air support impossible. Sarah studied the topographical maps spread across the table, memorizing every ridge and valley that could affect her approach. The target area was particularly challenging, with steep mountain walls that would limit her maneuvering options. The enemy had positioned themselves in caves and behind rock formations that provided excellent cover while giving them clear fields of fire on the trapped Green Berets. Her wingman, Lieutenant Colonel Jake Rodriguez, pointed to the map with his finger. "Weather window closes in 90 minutes, he said grimly. "After that, we won't be able to see anything down there." Jake was a veteran pilot with over 200 combat missions, and Sarah trusted his judgment completely. They had flown together for 8 months, developing the kind of communication that allowed them to coordinate attacks with minimal radio chatter. The Green Beret team leader, Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson, was maintaining contact through encrypted radio despite the desperate situation. His voice remained calm and professional as he described enemy positions and requested immediate air support. Sarah could hear the distant crack of rifle fire in the background of his transmissions, evidence of the intense firefight raging in the valley below. As Sarah climbed into her cockpit, she went through the familiar ritual of checking her instruments and weapons systems. The A-10 carried a fearsome array of firepower, including the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon that could fire depleted uranium rounds at an incredible rate. Mounted under her wings were Maverick missiles and cluster bombs designed to eliminate enemy positions while minimizing risk to friendly forces. The takeoff was smooth, with both A-10s lifting off into the crisp Afghan morning air. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as the ground fell away beneath her. Flying the A-10 was unlike any other aircraft experience. The plane was built around its cannon, designed specifically for the close air support mission that required pilots to fly low and slow over the battlefield. During the flight to the target area, Sarah reviewed the tactical situation one more time. The Green Berets had taken shelter behind a cluster of large boulders on the valley floor, but their position was becoming increasingly untenable. Enemy fighters were advancing from 3 directions, using the rocky terrain to mask their movement. Sarah would need to identify and eliminate these threats without hitting the friendly forces who were only a few hundred meters away. As they approached the target coordinates, Jake's voice crackled through her headset. "Reaper, I've got eyes on the valley. Multiple muzzle flashes from the ridgeline." Sarah banked her aircraft to get a better view of the battlefield. Through her targeting systems, she could see the Green Beret position marked by infrared strobes invisible to the naked eye but clear as day through her night vision equipment. The weather was worse than predicted, with low clouds beginning to obscure parts of the valley. Sarah knew they would have a limited window to provide effective support before visibility became impossible. She keyed her radio to contact the ground team directly. Thunder 6, this is Reaper Flight. We have eyes on your position and are ready to provide immediate close air support. Staff Sergeant Thompson's voice came through clearly, despite the sound of gunfire in the background. Reaper, we have enemy positions in the rocks about 300 meters north of our location. They've got us pinned down pretty good. We need you to clear a path so we can move to better cover. Sarah studied the terrain through her targeting pod, identifying the enemy positions that Thompson had described. The Taliban fighters had chosen their spots well, taking advantage of natural rock formations that provided excellent protection from small arms fire. However, their positions were vulnerable to air attack if she could get the right angle of approach. The first attack run required precise timing and coordination. Sarah dove her A-10 toward the valley floor, keeping her aircraft aligned with the target while avoiding the mountain peaks on either side. The GAU-8 cannon roared to life, sending a stream of 30mm rounds into the rocky outcropping where muzzle flashes had been spotted. The depleted uranium projectiles shattered stone and sent Taliban fighters scrambling for new cover. Jake followed immediately behind, his aircraft attacking a second position on the opposite side of the valley. The coordinated strike broke up the enemy's crossfire, giving the Green Berets an opportunity to move to a more defensible position. Sarah could see the Special Operations soldiers moving quickly across the rocky terrain, their desert camouflage making them nearly invisible except for the infrared markers that identified them as friendly forces. However, the Taliban response was swift and organized. Anti-aircraft fire began erupting from multiple positions throughout the valley, forcing both A-10s to take evasive action. Sarah felt her aircraft shudder as tracer rounds passed close to her wings. The enemy had been waiting for air support to arrive and had prepared accordingly with heavy machine guns and possibly shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. As Sarah climbed to avoid the heaviest concentration of anti-aircraft fire, she noticed something troubling on her instrument panel. The right engine temperature gauge was climbing rapidly, indicating a possible hit from enemy fire. She quickly ran through her emergency procedures while keeping one eye on the tactical situation below. The Green Berets were still in danger, and losing one of the two A-10s would significantly reduce their chances of survival. The engine temperature continued to rise despite her attempts to stabilize it. Warning lights began flashing across her instrument panel, and Sarah realized she had a serious problem. Enemy fire had apparently damaged cooling lines or possibly punctured the engine itself. She would need to make a difficult decision about whether to continue the mission with a potentially failing engine or return to base immediately. Below in the valley, Staff Sergeant Thompson's voice came through her headset with increasing urgency. Reaper Flight, we're taking heavy fire from multiple directions. We need immediate support or we're going to be overrun. Sarah could hear the desperation creeping into the normally calm voice of the Green Beret team leader. Sarah made her decision quickly. These soldiers needed her help, and she wasn't going to abandon them because of mechanical problems. She keyed her radio to inform Jake of the situation. Thunder 2, I've got engine trouble, but I'm staying on station. We finished this mission. Jake's response was immediate and predictable. Negative, Reaper. You need to return to base now. But Sarah was already diving toward another target, her damaged A-10 screaming down into the valley despite the mechanical problems that threatened to end her mission before the Green Berets could be saved. The right engine was making strange noises now, and Sarah could see smoke beginning to trail behind her aircraft. But the Green Berets were counting on her, and she had never abandoned soldiers who needed her help. The next few minutes would determine whether 12 Special Operations soldiers would make it home alive, and Sarah was determined not to let them down, regardless of her own aircraft's condition. The right engine seized completely during Sarah's fourth attack run, sending violent vibrations through the entire aircraft. Metal fragments erupted from the engine housing as internal components destroyed themselves in a cascade of mechanical failure. The A-10 lurched sideways as thrust from only the left engine created an immediate imbalance that threatened to send the aircraft into an uncontrolled roll. Sarah fought the controls with both hands, applying opposite rudder to compensate for the asymmetric thrust. The aircraft wanted to turn right constantly, requiring continuous pressure on the left rudder pedal to maintain straight flight. Her leg muscles began to ache from the constant strain, but she managed to keep the damaged Warthog flying level despite the challenging conditions. Smoke poured from the failed engine, creating a black trail that would make her aircraft visible to every enemy fighter in the valley. Sarah knew she had become a prime target for Taliban gunners who would recognize that a damaged aircraft was vulnerable to ground fire. However, she could see through her targeting systems that the Green Berets were still trapped and taking casualties. Jake's voice filled her headset with urgent concern. "Reaper, you need to climb out now. That aircraft won't stay airborne much longer." Sarah could see her wingman positioning himself to provide cover as she attempted to leave the combat area. But through her targeting pod, she watched Taliban fighters advancing on the Green Beret position from multiple directions. Staff Sergeant Thompson's radio calls were becoming increasingly desperate. "Reaper flight, they're coming from everywhere. We've got wounded soldiers who can't move. We need close air support right now, or we're not going to make it." Sarah could hear automatic weapons fire intensifying in the background of his transmission. The tactical display showed at least 40 Taliban fighters converging on the isolated team. The enemy had recognized that air support was limited and was pressing their numerical advantage. Several Green Berets were wounded and unable to move quickly, making evacuation impossible without eliminating the surrounding threats. Sarah made another diving attack despite her aircraft's condition, targeting a group of Taliban fighters who were advancing through a dried riverbed toward the American position. The GAU-8 cannon sent a devastating stream of fire into the enemy formation, but the aircraft's handling was becoming increasingly unpredictable. The single operating engine was running at maximum power to maintain flight, causing temperatures to climb dangerously high. Sarah monitored her instruments carefully while continuing to engage targets on the ground. She knew the left engine could fail at any moment, leaving her with no choice but to eject over enemy territory. During her fifth attack run, enemy anti-aircraft fire found its mark. A heavy machine gun burst struck her left wing, punching holes through the titanium armor and damaging control surfaces. The aircraft immediately began pulling harder to the right, requiring even more physical strength to maintain control. Warning lights cascaded across her instrument panel as hydraulic pressure dropped and electrical systems began failing. The flight control computer was struggling to compensate for the battle damage, but the A-10's simple and robust design allowed it to continue flying despite injuries that would have brought down most other aircraft. Sarah could feel her physical strength beginning to fade from the constant battle with the aircraft's controls. Flying the damaged A-10 required continuous muscle tension that was exhausting her rapidly. Sweat poured down her face inside her helmet as she fought to keep the aircraft level while engaging enemy targets. Through her headset, she could hear radio chatter from a rescue helicopter that was attempting to reach the trapped Green Berets. However, the helicopter pilots reported that enemy fire was too intense to attempt a landing. The Taliban fighters had to be eliminated before any evacuation could take place. Jake continued providing air support with his undamaged A-10, but a single aircraft couldn't cover all the enemy positions simultaneously. The Taliban fighters were using caves and rock overhangs that provided protection from aerial attack, forcing the pilots to make multiple passes to eliminate each position. Sarah's targeting systems identified a group of enemy fighters moving through a narrow canyon that would bring them within grenade range of the Green Beret position. Despite her aircraft's deteriorating condition, she rolled into another attack dive. The single engine screamed as she pushed it beyond normal operating limits. The GAU-8 cannon roared again, sending depleted uranium rounds into the Rocky Canyon walls. The projectiles ricocheted and fragmented, creating a deadly storm of metal that eliminated the Taliban fighters attempting to flank the American position. However, the sustained high-power operation was taking its toll on her remaining engine. Oil pressure began dropping as internal seals failed under the extreme operating conditions. Sarah knew she was asking too much of the mechanical systems, but the Green Berets needed every minute of air support she could provide. The rescue helicopter was still 20 minutes away, and the enemy showed no signs of retreating. During her 7th attack run, the left engine began making irregular sounds that indicated imminent failure. Sarah could see oil streaming from the engine housing, creating a second smoke trail that marked her aircraft's path through the sky. The Taliban fighters on the ground began concentrating their fire on her damaged A-10, recognizing that bringing down the aircraft would eliminate the primary threat to their attack. Staff Sergeant Thompson's voice came through her headset with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Reaper, we can see you're in trouble up there. You've done enough. Get out of here while you can." The Green Beret team leader had observed the damage to her aircraft and was trying to release her from the mission. Sarah keyed her radio with determination that surprised even herself. "Negative, Thunder 6. We're not leaving until you're safe." She could see wounded soldiers in the Green Beret position through her targeting pod, men who would die if she abandoned the mission now. The rescue helicopter needed more time, and she was the only thing standing between the Special Operations team and complete annihilation. The left engine temperature gauge climbed into the red zone as Sarah made another attack run. Metal components were beginning to fail under the extreme heat and stress of combat operations. She could feel the aircraft becoming increasingly unstable as the engine lost power gradually but continuously. Jake's aircraft swooped down to provide cover as Sarah climbed away from the target area. Her wingman could see that her A-10 was barely flyable, held together by the aircraft's legendary durability and Sarah's exceptional piloting skills. Black smoke poured from both engines now, creating a dark contrail that was visible for miles. The tactical situation on the ground was improving slowly. Sarah's repeated attacks had eliminated most of the Taliban fighters in the immediate area, but enemy reinforcements continued arriving from surrounding valleys. The Green Berets had managed to move to a slightly better defensive position, but they were still pinned down and unable to reach the helicopter landing zone. Sarah's left engine began experiencing power fluctuations that made level flight increasingly difficult. The aircraft would surge forward when the engine produced normal power, then decelerate rapidly as mechanical problems reduced thrust. Flying the damaged A-10 required constant adjustment of throttle and flight controls. Through her targeting systems, Sarah spotted a group of Taliban fighters setting up a heavy machine gun position that would dominate the helicopter landing zone. If that weapon became operational, the rescue helicopter would be unable to land without taking devastating fire. Sarah realized she needed to eliminate this threat despite her aircraft's critical condition. The final attack run would require flying directly over the heaviest concentration of enemy anti-aircraft fire. Sarah could see muzzle flashes erupting from numerous positions throughout the valley as Taliban fighters prepared to bring down her damaged aircraft. But the Green Berets were depending on her, and she had never failed soldiers who needed her help. As Sarah rolled into her final dive, the left engine began making sounds that indicated complete mechanical failure was imminent. Oil pressure dropped to 0, and metal fragments began trailing behind the aircraft as internal components destroyed themselves. The A-10 was flying on borrowed time, held aloft by momentum and the pilot's refusal to give up on the mission. The GAU-8 cannon fired its last burst into the Taliban machine gun position, eliminating the threat to the incoming rescue helicopter. But as Sarah pulled out of the dive, the left engine seized completely with a grinding roar that shook the entire aircraft. She was now flying a heavily damaged A-10 on no engines at all, with enemy territory stretching for hundreds of miles in every direction. With both engines completely failed, Sarah's A-10 became a 20,000-pound glider flying over some of the most hostile territory on Earth. The aircraft's nose dropped immediately as gravity began winning the battle against aerodynamic lift. Sarah pushed the stick forward to maintain flying speed, knowing that if the aircraft stalled, it would fall from the sky like a stone. The silence in the cockpit was deafening after hours of engine noise and combat operations. Only the whistle of wind through battle damage and the creaking of stressed metal reminded Sarah that her aircraft was still airborne. Every pilot trained for engine failures, but flying an A-10 with no power over mountainous terrain presented challenges that few aviators had ever faced. Jake's voice filled her headset with urgent concern. "Reaper, what's your status? I see both engines are down." Sarah's wingman was flying close formation, ready to provide assistance despite the limited options available. In enemy territory, there were no friendly airfields within gliding distance, and ejecting would likely mean capture or death. Sarah quickly calculated her aircraft's glide ratio and remaining altitude. The A-10 could glide approximately 8 miles for every mile of altitude, but the mountainous terrain limited her options severely. She needed to find a flat area large enough for an emergency landing, but most of the valleys contained nothing but rocks and enemy fighters. Staff Sergeant Thompson's voice crackled through her radio with excitement and concern. "Reaper, the helicopter is here. We're getting our wounded loaded now. What's your situation up there?" Sarah could see the rescue helicopter hovering over the Green Beret position, its crew chiefs helping load injured soldiers aboard. Sarah keyed her radio while fighting to maintain control of the powerless aircraft. "Thunder 6, mission complete. All your people are safe. That's what matters." She could see the helicopter lifting off with the entire Green Beret team aboard, their rescue mission successful despite the overwhelming odds they had faced. The A-10 continued losing altitude steadily as Sarah searched for a suitable landing area. The aircraft was surprisingly stable without engine power, a testament to the designers who had created a machine capable of surviving battle damage that would destroy most other aircraft. However, she was rapidly running out of options as the ground rose to meet her. Jake flew alongside her damaged aircraft, his experienced eyes assessing the situation. "Reaper, there's a dry riverbed about 10 miles southeast. It's your best shot for a landing." Sarah could see the area he was describing through her navigation systems, a relatively flat strip of sand and gravel that might be long enough to accommodate an emergency landing. The glide to the riverbed required perfect energy management. Sarah had to maintain enough airspeed to keep the aircraft controllable while stretching her glide distance as far as possible. Too fast, and she would run out of altitude before reaching the landing area. Too slow, and the aircraft would stall and crash into the mountains. As Sarah maneuvered toward the riverbed, she began preparing for the emergency landing. She lowered the landing gear despite knowing it would increase drag and reduce her glide distance. The A-10's robust landing gear was designed to handle rough field operations, but landing without engines on unprepared terrain would test every component to its limits. The approaching landing area looked increasingly challenging as Sarah got closer. What had appeared smooth from altitude revealed itself to be scattered with rocks and debris that could destroy the aircraft's landing gear. However, she had no other options. The riverbed was the only flat area within gliding distance, and her altitude was decreasing rapidly. Jake's aircraft flew overhead as Sarah approached the makeshift runway. "Reaper, you're looking good. Surface winds are calm, and I don't see any obstacles in your path." Sarah appreciated her wingman's encouragement, though both pilots knew the landing would be extremely dangerous regardless of conditions. Sarah lined up with the riverbed and began her final approach. The A-10 descended toward the sandy surface at a steep angle, using the aircraft's natural stability to maintain control without engine power. She could see dust devils swirling across the landing area, evidence of the desert winds that could make the landing even more challenging. The touchdown was harder than any landing Sarah had ever experienced. The main landing gear struck the riverbed with tremendous force, sending shock waves through the aircraft's structure. The nose gear collapsed immediately, sending the A-10 sliding across the sandy surface in a shower of sparks and debris. Sarah fought to maintain directional control as the aircraft slid down the riverbed. Without the nose gear, the A-10's cannon barrel dug into the sand, acting as an improvised brake that threatened to flip the aircraft forward. The pilot's seat harness cut into her shoulders as deceleration forces threw her against the restraint system. The aircraft finally came to rest against a large boulder that stopped its forward momentum with a grinding crash. Smoke began pouring from electrical systems damaged during the violent landing sequence. Sarah quickly shut down all remaining aircraft systems and prepared to evacuate before potential fire could trap her in the cockpit. Jake's voice filled her headset with relief and admiration. "Reaper, that was the best dead-stick landing I've ever seen. Are you injured?" Sarah performed a quick self-assessment and found nothing more serious than bruises and minor cuts from debris that had entered the cockpit during the landing. Sarah unbuckled her harness and climbed from the damaged cockpit onto the aircraft's wing. The A-10 was clearly destroyed, with both engines completely burned out and the fuselage cracked in multiple places. However, the aircraft had done its job, delivering her safely to the ground despite impossible circumstances. Within minutes, Jake was circling overhead while coordinating her rescue. A combat search and rescue helicopter was already en route to her position, guided by GPS coordinates from her survival radio. The helicopter crew had been monitoring the entire mission and was prepared for an immediate pickup from the crash site. As Sarah waited for rescue, she reflected on the morning's events. 12 Green Berets were alive because she had refused to abandon the mission when her aircraft was damaged. The Taliban attack had been defeated, and every American soldier was returning home safely. The cost of one A-10 seemed insignificant compared to the lives that had been saved. The rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon within 20 minutes, its crew scanning the area for enemy activity while approaching Sarah's position. The helicopter touched down briefly in a cloud of dust, and Sarah ran toward the aircraft while her wingman provided overhead cover against possible Taliban response. As the rescue helicopter lifted off with Sarah aboard, she could see her destroyed A-10 sitting in the riverbed like a wounded warrior. The aircraft had absorbed incredible battle damage and continued flying long enough to complete the mission. The A-10's reputation for survivability had been proven once again under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. During the flight back to Bagram Airfield, Sarah learned that all 12 Green Berets had been successfully evacuated without losing a single soldier. Staff Sergeant Thompson had specifically requested that Sarah be recognized for her actions during the rescue mission. The Green Beret team leader credited her determination to continue the mission despite mechanical failures as the key factor in their survival. Jake flew alongside the rescue helicopter during the return flight, his aircraft serving as an escort against possible enemy threats. Over the radio, he expressed admiration for Sarah's performance under pressure. Flying a damaged A-10 on one engine, then no engines, while continuing to provide close air support, had demonstrated exceptional piloting skills and courage. The helicopter touched down at Bagram Airfield to crowds of personnel who had monitored the mission from the ground. Word of Sarah's actions had spread quickly through the base, and everyone wanted to see the pilot who had saved 12 Green Berets while flying a dying aircraft. Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention, believing she had simply done her job as any pilot would have done. Within hours, Sarah was debriefing intelligence officers about the mission details. Her account of the Taliban positions and tactics would help plan future operations in the area. However, the most important outcome was that 12 Special Operations soldiers had returned safely from a mission that had seemed impossible to survive. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her quarters writing a letter to her family back home. She couldn't tell them specific details about the mission due to operational security requirements, but she wanted them to know she was safe and thinking of them. The letter didn't mention the engine failures or emergency landing, focusing instead on her gratitude for their support and love. The destroyed A-10 was eventually recovered from the riverbed by a special team using heavy-lift helicopters. Analysis of the wreckage showed that enemy fire had severed fuel lines and damaged critical engine components, creating the cascade of mechanical failures that had nearly ended the mission. However, the aircraft's robust design had allowed it to continue flying long enough to complete the rescue operation. Sarah's actions during the mission earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the military's highest awards for aerial achievement. The citation specifically mentioned her decision to continue the mission despite mechanical failures and her successful emergency landing of a powerless aircraft. More importantly to Sarah, it recognized that her actions had directly saved the lives of 12 American soldiers. Years later, Sarah would occasionally meet Green Beret veterans who had been part of the team she had rescued that day. These encounters always reminded her why she had chosen to become a military pilot. The opportunity to serve alongside the finest soldiers in the world and to make a difference when it mattered most made every challenge and sacrifice worthwhile. The mission became legendary within the A-10 community as an example of what the aircraft could accomplish in the hands of a skilled and determined pilot. Sarah's story was used in training programs to illustrate the importance of mission completion and the extraordinary capabilities of the Warthog when flown by someone who refused to give up on soldiers in need.